The tray slipped. Maya Collins reacted on instinct, twisting her body just in time so the crystal glasses didn't shatter across the marble floor. A ripple of laughter broke out anyway, sharp, amused, careless. The men at the corner table had been watching her struggle long before the near fall. One of them clapped slowly, mock applause echoing above the low hum of the restaurant. "Careful," a voice said, smooth and rich with boredom. "That bottle costs more than your monthly paycheck." Maya steadied the tray, her knuckles white, her face calm. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She simply finished placing the drinks down with surgical precision and stepped back. The man who had spoken leaned into his leather chair, gold watch catching the light. Edward Langford. Everyone in the room knew his face. Founder of Langford Global Capital, one of the most powerful men in American finance. The kind of billionaire who didn't need to raise his voice to dominate a room. His companions laughed again. Edward tilted his head, eyes flicking over Maya's uniform. "You work here long?" "Long enough," she replied. That earned a few raised brows. Edward smiled, entertained. "Since you're standing there," he said casually, swirling his drink, "maybe you can settle a debate for us." Maya said nothing. "We're finalizing a $38 billion acquisition," Edward continued. "Tech company, international footprint. Everyone at this table thinks it's a masterpiece." He paused. "What do you think?" His nephew snorted. "Careful, Uncle Ed, she might charge a consulting fee." The table erupted. Maya should have walked away. That was the rule. Don't engage, don't be seen, don't remind anyone who you used to be. But then Edward said the name. "Royce Strategic Group is backing it," he added. "Julian Royce himself." Something shifted behind Maya's eyes. She set the tray down slowly. "You're being set up." The laughter died instantly. Edward blinked. "Excuse me?" Maya met his gaze for the first time. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. "If you sign that deal," she said, "you'll lose everything you've built within 18 months. Silence swallowed the table. Nearby diners pretended not to stare. Edward studied her now, not amused anymore. "That's a bold claim for someone pouring wine." "Delay the signing," Maya said. "That's all I'm saying." Then she turned and walked away, heart pounding, every instinct screaming that she'd just broken the one rule that had kept her alive. Edward didn't touch his drink. For the rest of the night, Maya moved like a ghost through the crest room. She avoided the corner table, kept her eyes down, focused on the rhythm of work, plates, glasses, steps. Breathe. But she felt it, the weight of Edward Langford's attention tracking her across the room. She clocked out past midnight, changed in silence, and stepped into the cool city air. The moment she reached the sidewalk, a voice stopped her. "Miss?" She froze. Edward stood a few feet away, coat draped over his arm, his driver waiting by the curb. Up close he looked older, tired, sharp eyes dulled by years of winning. "You don't strike me as reckless," he said, "so why say something that could cost you your job?" Maya swallowed. "I didn't say it to save myself." "Then why?" She hesitated. "Because I've seen this before." Edward studied her face, searching. "Get in the car." "That's not happening." He smiled faintly. It wasn't a request. She laughed once, bitter. "I'm not for sale." "Neither is my company," Edward replied, "which is why I'm listening." They sat across from each other in the back of the car, city lights streaking past the tinted windows. Edward spoke first. "You know details that aren't public." "I know patterns." "Who are you?" Maya looked down at her hands, the scars she never talked about, the nights she barely slept. Someone who already paid the price for trusting Julian Royce. Edward's jaw tightened. "Explain." Her voice dropped. "My real name is Marissa Hale." That got his attention. "I built the algorithm that made Royce Strategic its first billion," she continued. "I also uncovered how he stole it." Edward said nothing. "When I confronted him," Marissa said, "he framed me. Offshore accounts, fake transaction trails. By the time regulators showed up, I was already guilty on paper." Edward leaned back slowly. "And you disappeared." "I survived." The car stopped. Edward exhaled. "Come with me." "To where?" "To prove what you just claimed," he said, "or to walk away forever." She considered him. Power. Money. Another man who could destroy her if he chose to. "I want protection," she said, "and access." Edward nodded once. "You'll have both." If you're still watching this, pause for 1 second and ask yourself,
What would you do if the person everyone overlooked held the truth that could end an empire? Make sure you like this video and subscribe, because what happens next turns everything upside down. By morning, Marissa stood inside Langford Tower, wearing borrowed confidence and a temporary badge that read consultant. The executives didn't hide their hostility. Richard Vance, the CFO, barely looked at her. Helen Moore from Risk Management smiled too tightly. Edward wasted no time. "She has 72 hours, he said. Then we decide." Marissa sat at the terminal, fingers flying, eyes narrowing as the numbers told their story. Inflated assets, circular debt, a shell company buried under layers of legal camouflage, Iron Veil Holdings. Her chest tightened. "They're hiding liabilities post-acquisition," she said aloud. "Once you absorb them, they declare bankruptcy and drag you down with them." Richard scoffed. "That's speculative." Marissa didn't look up. "No, it's identical." "Identical to what?" Edward asked. "To the code Julian used before," she replied, "and he never changes what works." Helen shifted in her seat. Marissa stopped typing. Slowly she turned. "You approved the audits." Helen's smile cracked. "That's absurd." Marissa tapped the screen. "Silverline Digital. Monthly transfers. Same proxy structure as before." Security moved closer. Helen stood abruptly. "This is a setup." Marissa's voice was calm. "No. This is the truth catching up." The final file unlocked with a soft click. Project Black Mirror. Edward stared at the screen, fury and disbelief colliding in his eyes. Outside, the city carried on, unaware that a financial giant was about to fall, and that the woman everyone dismissed as invisible had just pulled the first brick free. And this was only the beginning.
Edward Langford didn't speak for a long moment. The room felt tighter, the air heavier, as lines of code and transaction maps filled the screen in front of him. Numbers didn't lie, and these numbers were screaming. Richard Vance cleared his throat. "This could still be misinterpreted. Data can be framed." Marissa finally looked at him, really looked at him. "You know what framing looks like," she said quietly. "You helped perfect it." Richard's face flushed. "That's a serious accusation." "So was the one that ruined my life," Marissa replied, her voice steady but charged with something sharp underneath. "Yet here we are." Edward raised a hand, silencing the room. "Everyone out," he said, "except her." Security escorted Richard and Helen away, both protesting, both pale. When the doors closed, Edward turned to Marissa, his expression no longer skeptical, just grim. "How deep does this go?" he asked. "Deep enough to drown you," she said, "unless you move first." He nodded once. "What do you need?" "Time and full access." "You already have enemies in this building," Edward said. "If they realize what you're doing." "They already do," Marissa cut in, "which means they're running." Edward studied her. "Then let's make them trip." For the next 48 hours, Langford Tower barely slept. Marissa lived on black coffee and adrenaline, her fingers dancing across keyboards, her mind 3 steps ahead of everyone else. She mapped shell companies across continents, traced digital fingerprints through layers of encryption, and watched the same familiar pattern emerge again and again. Julian Royce's signature. Edward watched from behind the glass wall, a billionaire reduced to a student again, witnessing the dismantling of a deal he'd once believed flawless. Each revelation hit harder than the last. At 2:17 a.m., Marissa froze. "There," she whispered. Edward leaned in. "What is it?" "A biometric lock," she said. "Someone inside has to physically authorize this file." Edward's jaw tightened. "Who?" Marissa didn't answer immediately. She cross-referenced timestamps, access logs, internal approvals. Her chest ached with the weight of certainty. Helen Moore. Edward exhaled sharply. "Bring her back." Helen arrived an hour later, defiant and furious. "You have no right." Marissa slid a document across the table. "Silverline Digital," she said. "That's your retirement plan, isn't it?" Helen's eyes flickered. "You approved false audits," Marissa continued, "suppressed risk flags, all while Julian funneled money through your proxy accounts." Helen laughed, brittle. "You have no proof." Marissa tapped her keyboard. "Actually, I froze the account 20 minutes ago. Regulators have it now." The color drained from Helen's face. Edward stood. "Unlock the file." Helen hesitated, hands trembling. Security stepped closer. She pressed her thumb to the scanner. The screen changed. What followed felt unreal. Detailed plans, internal communications, a countdown to collapse scheduled months after acquisition.
Edward stared as years of trust unraveled in seconds. This was always the plan. Use you, then take you. As if summoned by the words, the doors opened. Julian Royce walked in, clapping slowly, a familiar smile playing on his lips. Edward stiffened. You have some nerve. Julian shrugged. I prefer confidence. He turned to Marissa. I wondered how long you'd stay hidden. She met his gaze, unflinching. Not long enough to forget. Julian sighed. You always were brilliant. Shame you couldn't stay loyal. Edward slammed his hand on the table. This deal is dead. Julian laughed. You think that stops me? Marissa stepped forward. No, this does. She plugged in a small drive. On the screen, lines of code appeared side by side, old and new, identical. Julian's smile faltered. That's my original algorithm, Marissa said. The one you stole, and the one you're still using. The room went silent. Edward straightened. Security. Julian backed away slowly, realization sinking in. You don't understand what you're doing. Marissa's voice didn't waver. I do. I'm ending it. By morning, regulators swarmed Langford Tower. Deals were halted, accounts frozen. Julian Royce's empire began collapsing in real time. Edward stood beside Marissa as the sun rose over the city. You saved my company. She shook her head. I saved the truth. He studied her. Stay. Help me rebuild. She considered him, the power he represented, the risk. I won't be invisible again. You won't be, Edward said. I promise. And if you're still here, don't forget to like and subscribe, because the next move Marissa makes doesn't just change her life, it rewrites the rules of the game.
Marissa didn't celebrate. While news outlets exploded with headlines and analysts scrambled to rewrite forecasts, she sat alone in a glass-walled conference room, staring at the city below. Victory had never felt the way movies promised. There was no rush, just a deep, steady ache where fear used to live. Edward Langford watched her from the doorway for a long moment before stepping in. The board wants to announce you as interim head of strategic oversight, he said. They think it'll calm investors. Marissa didn't turn. I don't care about titles. They care, Edward replied. And right now, perception is survival. She finally faced him. If I do this, it's on my terms. A faint smile tugged at his lips. I wouldn't expect anything less. Within hours, Langford Global Capital transformed into a war room. Emergency meetings, internal audits, lawyers flooding the halls, employees whispering, unsure who would still have a job by week's end. Marissa moved through it all with quiet authority. She spoke little, listened carefully, and acted decisively. She replaced teams, froze suspicious divisions, and installed monitoring systems that saw what human eyes never could. Some executives bristled. Others feared her. A few, the honest ones, were relieved. Richard Vance tried to contact Edward twice that day. Edward didn't answer. By the third day, the retaliation began. It started small. A shipment delayed overseas, a leaked memo that never should have left the building, stock volatility that made no sense. Edward slammed a report down on the table. This is Royce. Marissa nodded. He's running what's left of his code remotely. I thought you shut it down. I shut down the known access points, she said. Julian always builds a back door. Edward rubbed his temples. What do we do? Marissa's eyes hardened, a familiar fire flickering to life. We let him think he's winning. She explained the plan calmly, methodically. A false panic, a controlled leak, a rumor about Langford offloading its most valuable holding, an energy tech partnership Julian had been watching for months. Edward listened, then exhaled slowly. You're talking about baiting him? I'm talking about ending him, Marissa said, legally. The next week, Langford Global appeared to wobble. Analysts speculated, commentators panicked. Julian Royce took the bait. He shorted aggressively. At precisely 3:59 p.m. on a Friday, Langford announced not a sale, but an expansion. A massive investment paired with a federal-backed partnership. The market exploded. Julian's position collapsed in minutes. By the time trading closed, everything he had left was gone. Marissa watched the numbers sail, her hands resting flat on the desk. No smile, no triumph, just closure. Edward stood beside her. It's over. She nodded. For him. Weeks later, Julian Royce pleaded guilty. No spectacle, no speech, just a man finally out of excuses. Langford Global stabilized, investors returned, trust rebuilt, slowly but deliberately. Marissa declined interviews, declined awards, declined attention. One evening, Edward found her on the rooftop again, the city glowing beneath them.
You could be anything you want now, he said. She considered that. I already am. He nodded. Thank you. She looked at him, truly looked at him. You listened. That mattered. They stood in silence, the wind carrying the noise of a city that would never know how close it had come to collapse. And if this story reminded you that intelligence, courage, and truth can come from the most unexpected places, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Because sometimes, the person everyone ignores is the one who sees everything. The end was quiet, but the impact lasted forever.
The days that followed were a strange blend of normalcy and quiet vigilance. Langford Tower hummed with renewed energy, but Marissa never let herself relax. She walked the halls in her tailored blazer, badge clipped neatly, eyes scanning for anomalies, traces of deception that could still be hiding. Employees greeted her with cautious respect, some with awe, some with resentment, but all with awareness that nothing would slip past her now. Edward occasionally joined her in strategy sessions, not to direct, but to observe. He had wealth, power, and influence, yet he had learned a lesson about vigilance, humility, and the value of someone who truly sees the game before it begins. One afternoon, as Marissa reviewed transaction logs, Edward approached quietly. "You could have taken millions," he said, leaning on the table. "You chose to rebuild the company instead." She didn't flinch. Money isn't the point, integrity is. That's what Julian Royce lacked, and that's why he lost. Edward nodded, silently agreeing. "You've turned this empire into something stronger, smarter, safer." Marissa allowed herself a rare, small smile. "I didn't just protect your company, I protected everyone in it. Workers, investors, even those who didn't know they were vulnerable." For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of peace. The fear that had followed her, years of hiding, being hunted, betrayed, had finally started to lift. Later, on the rooftop overlooking the city skyline, Edward said, "You changed the rules of the game, Marissa. Not just for Julian, not just for me, but for everyone watching." She looked at him, her expression calm but resolute. "And I'll keep watching," she said. "No one slips through my eyes again." The wind whipped around them, carrying the energy of a city that never slept. And Marissa knew that though the battle had ended, the vigilance and intelligence she carried would protect countless others in the quiet wars no one ever saw. If you've been inspired by Marissa's courage and cleverness, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Stories like this remind us that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one shaping the future, and that truth and integrity always leave a mark. This was the story of Marissa Hale, a woman who turned betrayal into justice, invisibility into power, and silence into the ultimate weapon. The city carried on, unaware, but some battles, fought with intelligence and integrity, are remembered forever.
As the weeks passed, Marissa's presence at Langford Global became more than a safeguard. It became a symbol. Employees who had once whispered about office politics now walked a little taller, inspired by the quiet authority of someone who had faced betrayal and emerged unbroken. Edward watched her from a distance sometimes, realizing that her strength didn't come from wealth, influence, or threats. It came from clarity, precision, and the refusal to be silenced. He had inherited power, but Marissa had earned it, and in earning it, she had redefined what it meant to lead. One afternoon, Marissa received a message on her secure line, an anonymous tip about a potential weakness in the company's overseas investments. She frowned, recognizing immediately the subtle patterns she had seen before. Julian Royce may have been out of the game, but corruption rarely vanished. It only waited. She activated her team, now trained under her watchful eye, and began a quiet investigation, tracing financial threads through multiple continents, unearthing anomalies and discrepancies with the same meticulous approach she had used to dismantle Royce's empire. Edward appeared beside her, curiosity mixing with concern. "Already planning your next move?" Marissa looked at him, eyes steady. "It's not about moves, it's about prevention. If someone tries to pull what Julian did, I want them caught before they even start." The billionaire smiled faintly. "You've changed everything here. Not just the company, you've changed the rules." She nodded, allowing herself a brief moment of satisfaction. "That's the point. Rules weren't being followed before, and I can't allow that to happen again." As the sun set over the city skyline, casting long shadows over Langford Tower, Marissa knew her life had been irrevocably altered. The invisible waitress who had once been overlooked had become the unseen force ensuring justice, integrity, and protection for thousands. And while the headlines would fade and the public would forget the drama, those who truly understood would remember one thing: that brilliance, courage, and unwavering principle could topple giants. If you followed Marissa's story to this point, remember to like and subscribe, because it's proof that sometimes the quietest voice in the room can change everything. The story ends here, but the legacy of intelligence, vigilance, and resilience lives on.